Haha. I feel like there's not. Yeah. Oh, good. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's session when we are going to be exploring some of the opportunities and challenges around working with data related to marine mammal conservation. So thank you all for coming today. It's really great to see so many of you. We weren't really sure in terms of our audience here at Arctic Frontiers how many marine mammal people of interest in marine mammals are going to be here, so it's lovely to see folks turning out. So today's session, in the interest of trying to be as interactive as possible, we've got some activities that we're going to be getting you all to take part in. But I wanted to just, I guess, kick off first of all by saying hello, but thanking, this session couldn't be possible without the support of the UK Arctic Office and the Foreign Office. I think I see Anne in the background there, who made all this possible today, so thank you, Anne. So my name's Lauren McQuinney. I'm an assistant professor at Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh, and my not-so-secret obsession and passion in life is trying to understand basically how we can mitigate the impacts of human activities on marine mammals, and particularly whales. I don't think I'm probably misspeaking by saying that collectively as scientists, we haven't historically done a very good job of necessarily working outside our silos. We tend to have our comfort zones, and in particular when this applies to data, we know data that we're comfortable with, we recognize, we work with a lot, and then sometimes we don't look beyond that. And I think it's led to quite a lot of missed opportunities for doing so much more together. And we're going to basically discuss some of this, hopefully in today's session with our guest speakers. But again, as human beings, we're the only ones that draw lines on a map and recognize these arbitrary areas where we place huge amounts of value on the space. The marine mammals that work in these they don't. And of course, when we're looking at data, often our data goes up to a certain line and then it just stops in terms of jurisdictional boundaries within a project. And that leads to a huge amount of, again, missed opportunities, I think, to really have a more holistic approach to when we're looking at conservation of highly mobile species. Right, so today, without further ado, in terms of getting stuck in, I thought I would just quickly, before I give way to the speakers, we were going to do an initial bit of brainstorming with you all, but everybody's kind of been trickling in, so we thought we'd leave this to the end. So we're going to first start, change the program. We're going to do this initial kind of work with the post-it notes at the back of the room. Hopefully this does not fall down. We've had one escapee piece of paper, hopefully no more for the rest of the session. But I just wanted to kind of highlight to you all, because as we go through today, the whole idea is I'm going to try and suck information and thoughts out of you all. There's going to be the opportunity to feed them back to us during the discussion, but also would invite you all, as you're kind of, when we're leaving, there'll be time to add any further thoughts to the paperboard at the back of the room. So we're going to have our speakers that are going to come up and give you some of the insights and experiences they've had with working on some very different projects that all, in some way or another, include marine mammal data. You'll have an opportunity to ask them questions at the end of that. And then we'll have a bit more of a group discussion, and we'll be looking at kind of like to delve a little bit deeper into the challenges around getting data, what data we need, what data is available, and what opportunities there are for a collaboration. So without further ado, I'm going to invite our first speaker up. So Emma, do you want to come up and also you can introduce yourself as well? Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Let's see. Yes, hi. I'm Emma Vogel. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Tromsø in our Arctic Sustainability Lab there. And so today I'm going to talk a bit about a project called Bioprotect. And I kind of put this project in this theme, thinking of it as a data-driven solutions for marine conservation. So I think one thing that's quite unique about this project is that it really highlights the importance of data sharing and cooperation to help us broaden our understanding not only of marine mammals and marine mammal research, but biodiversity and ecology as a whole throughout the North Atlantic and Arctic oceans. So, yes. Yes, so BioProtect is a Horizon EU mission, ocean missions project, and it started in May 2024, and it ends in April 2028. And BioProtect aims to protect and restore the ecosystems and biodiversity by advancing area-based management tools to accelerate the protection and restoration of marine biodiversity. So that's a bit of a mouthful, but the main goal is to take all of this, to work collaboratively and to take all of this pre-existing data from different kinds of sources, different areas, different information for biological data, and also anthropogenic data, and put it together to create a tool that decision makers can use to design and create more science-informed management and marine spatial area decisions. So every year, there are many great migrations that occur across the North Atlantic and Arctic oceans for animals to take advantage of the abundant waters that there are throughout. And there are many different migratory routes between these important habitats and where these migrations occur. And so there are many commonly used routes that they take, and these are often referred to as blue corridors. So these are the ways that where kind of big groups of animals are using these almost marine highways to get from point A to point B, which is essential for them to do that, for them to find food or reproduction. And these blue corridors, they can span way farther than just political boundaries, but they can also be quite local. And they're essential for their survival. And so we want, by knowing and understanding where these animals are going and why they're going, how much time they're spending there, we're able to get more information about how we can better make decisions of how we should be using this area and where we can do different activities that would cause the least effects on the ecosystems while still being able to sustain ourselves. Yes. Yes, so BioProtect is a project that's focusing on integrating this ecological connectivity data, as well as incorporating in pressures data and pressures data from different human activities to be able to have this kind of tool to use to quantify the information and the biodiversity data to make decisions on what places to put different activities and what places to avoid that would allow for the most sustainable use of the data without really compromising or having as many negative things for that. And it really focuses on this connectivity, so the connections between the areas where these animals are going. And so to do that, as part of BioProtect, we're using these large multi-species data sets to identify these blue corridors and inform ecological connectivity models. And so one example of it, one of the big data sets we're using is this from the program CTRAC. So CTRAC is a pre-existing program, so it wasn't created for this project, but it's a really good example of collaborative data sharing, in my opinion at least. So CTRAC involves 69 partners. It was started in 2014. It has 69 partners from 52 different institutions across 14 countries. And it annually collects data on these seabirds at over 75 different North Atlantic field sites. And through this collaboration, they're able to stimulate even more new collaborations and really go deeper than just kind of looking at local specifics, but seeing how things are connected and how things are interacting together way outside of just national boundaries and getting a more full, holistic picture of what's going on. Yes. And so then we're also looking at marine mammals, so whale data, and which is probably what this kind of talk is about. And here we have a few, it's a little bit, there's not one concrete set of data where there's a lot of organizations coming together to share it. So there's a bit more of a challenge of bringing these different data sets from different institutions together, and that requires a lot of collaboration. So any kind of marine mammal, or any science really, requires many collaborators in all stages, from funding to field work, to programming the tools, getting the resources, writing these applications, and this only can happen to get data sets like this by really collaboratively working together. And by getting this kind of rich data, we're able to have a much clearer understanding of the full life cycle and the full biodiversity of the ocean, of where these animals, what's important to them, and where they're spending their time, and how we should make decisions based off of that. And so while we understand that their survival depends on their ability to be able to move from point A to point B based on their life cycles, we also know that it also really depends on their ability to move there safely across these oceans, across these borders. And as they're doing this, there's many growing threats that have been occurring. So we've got lots of human activities happening in the oceans, and lots of different databases that can be used to access this kind of data at the North Atlantic scale. So we have things like human activities like vessel traffic, which is increasing at remarkable rates, as well as other activities like offshore oil and gas, aquaculture, fisheries, recreational use. And all of these types of activities may or may not have impacts on animals as they're using this area. So accordingly, these kind of ecological connectivity models that I was talking about earlier are based not only on the biomass moving, these megafauna moving, but also what they're moving against, what resistant surfaces that they're having to meet along the way to get from where they are to where they want to go. Yes, and so then when we incorporate all of these kind of resistance surfaces together, the different anthropogenic impacts, we get this as an example of a resistant surface of kind of overall impact of how what the kind of seascape might look like for these animals. And these can be adjusted based on how different animals might interact with the world and what kind of anthropogenic things might affect them more or less. And so through this BioProtect project, we're working on creating these kind of resistant surfaces to see how the animals are interacting with the environment around them and what they have to go through. So basically, the plan in this project is to use this already collected multi-species tracking data to create these ecological connectivity models. And then we pair that with these human activities and pressures. So it's all really based in this project on pre-existing data, which is really unique, which of course also means it's all really based on collaboration. Not one person owns any of this. But using this all together, we're able to have a more holistic understanding of the socio-ecological systems of the North Atlantic and Arctic oceans. And we plan to use this to create this management tool, to allow non-specialists, non-scientists or researchers understand their areas and what kind of, by understanding their specific area, they can use these models to have a better idea of what kind of protections or how to design it in a way that's meaningful. Yes, and so the way that I see it, there are kind of three main barriers in sharing marine mammal data. One of them is this kind of lack of homogeneous data vocabulary. So I see this as a big barrier for users because it makes it difficult to share data effectively. So, for example, you might have a data set where you have a section looking at distance. And while some people might head that as distance, others might call it meters or kilometers or so many other things. And even if everything else is perfect and everyone's happy to share their data, having these different data sets with lacking metadata explaining it makes it really difficult to try to figure out how they all can connect and put them in one way where they can all be usable together. The second I see is that there's limited access to open access data. So many researchers throughout all fields, but also marine mammal science, hesitate to share data before publishing. And even after publishing, sometimes they might lack the time to format the data or to find a place to put a repository to put it, and instead they have to focus on new projects. So often this kind of gets put to the side. And the fact that data needs to be fair, so it needs to be findable, accessible, interpretable, and reusable. And that takes time and work, and it's not always fully prioritized. And so there's a recent study that showed that out of 113 major polar data providers, they found that 60% of existing polar research data was unfindable through common kind of search engines. And that this data, to be able to access it, you needed to already know what you were looking for specifically, and you needed to look on institutional websites. So you already needed to know that it existed, and you need to know where it is to be able to access 60% of Arctic data. So that's just not a very efficient way of getting data out and being able to use it for multiple different ways. So this lack of an agreed infrastructure or technology for sharing marine mammal data, so there's no universal infrastructure. There are many wonderful opportunities and different platforms to do it, but they're often seen as competing, or you might do one or not the other, and because of that, it's hard to have a clear idea of where all the data is. And I think in order to really allow research to grow and have so much more data, it's essential to kind of try to come together as a field and have a better idea of what clear guidelines for this kind of data collection. So Bioprotect is really just one example of overcoming some of the challenges to produce data-driven solutions. So this is a kind of big picture outline of Bioprotect. And I really am only talking about, during this presentation, just talking about parts of Work Package 3 and Work Package 4. But it's clear that by working together and collaboratively, we'll be better suited to find and identify and utilize pre-existing data to solve problems in the world and come up with solutions for biodiversity and climate change crisis. So by coming together and synthesizing the data, it really will help. And the aim with this project is just specifically to accelerate the effective protection and restoration of biodiversity of marine ecosystems and coastal communities and coastal ecosystems. And with that, Bioprotect, of course, is not just me. It's many institutions and many people working collaboratively. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. In fact, does anybody have any questions for Emma, just when they're fresh in your head? Because I feel like if anybody's like me, I have lots of questions in the moment, and then they say, oh, 20 minutes later, now we can have questions, and I can't remember any of the good burning questions I had. So does anybody have any questions? Yeah, run. Yeah, perfect.
Hi there, my name is Elspeth. I'm a student at UIT, getting my master's in environmental law. And thank you for your presentation. That was very interesting. Looking at some of the maps that you showed, quite a bit of the data is located around like the coastal Norway and the Barents and the Greenland Sea and around Svalbard, but the Arctic Ocean remains quite blank. And I know that there are lots of knowledge gaps within the Arctic Ocean and the biodiversity there, and there are limits to when data can be gathered, like only in the summer time. And so how do you propose or foresee overcoming these knowledge gaps, and how can we know what the anthropogenic impact is on biodiversity in the Arctic if the pre-existing data is not really there as it currently stands?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a very good one, and it's challenging. I mean, you know, I think a lot of it comes down to collaboration. There is data there. There is. I mean, I'm only focusing on tracking data, which is one tiny subsect of data. And there is tracking data there. But it all is about collaboration, working together, people valuing, sharing their data, and not trying to use it as much as possible in many different ways. So I think that's one thing, is trying to pull together the data that isn't there, and that, of course, is going to come with building relationships, I think, between researchers and collaborations, and so that's one end of it. Also, a big part of Bioprotect is, one goal of it is that it's hoping that it's going to be quite a sophisticated and well-rounded model that's understanding many aspects of the system, and the hope is that it will be able to then be a tool that can be applied to different systems. So I didn't go into that specifically, but part of it is, so we have these associated regions, and we have 5 of them that will be, that are directly, we are testing it within them, but then we have other countries that are outside of those that have applied to also be part of the project, where we're going to test these tools there to see how they work, where there are problems, and how we can tune them. Hopefully that answered it.
Ronja? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Ronja. I'm working for WWF Global Arctic Program, a really cool initiative. I was wondering, because your maps were very much focused on the North Atlantic, whether you're taking a pan-Arctic perspective or a North Atlantic focused perspective. And very rightfully, I've also worked with pulling together cetacean data, and it's a challenge. Are you envisioning an own data bank or data storage facility, or how are you thinking about ways of feeding this into Arctic Council working groups such as PAIM and CAF? Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Very good question also. The project, BioProtect, is focused on a North Atlantic and Arctic perspective, so that's kind of the lens that we're looking at it. So of course, yes, we are missing, it's not a complete picture, but it's focusing on that section, so yes. And then within the project, I don't believe there's a plan specifically of creating a data repository through it, but there's been discussion about how we should share this data and how it should be available, and I think it's a good starting point or stepping point to try to develop a more open and agreed upon thing. It's a bit above my my decisions, but I think this would be a good starting point towards that. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Emma. Yeah, and thank you for your questions. I feel like I'm glad Emma got them, because I was like, ooh, where do you start? And I would encourage you, actually, in terms of later on some of the questions that we're going to be exploring collectively a bit further, think about that. Yeah, some of the challenges you were raising there about collecting data in the high Arctic and thinking about how we can potentially overcome them is one of the things that we're hopefully going to delve a wee bit deeper into. Kate, can I invite you up to talk next?
Thank you. I'm Kate Gormley. I'm an interdisciplinary fellow at the University of Aberdeen, and I must fully admit I am very new to Arctic research and marine mammals for that matter, but what I do have plenty of experience in is environmental data, the need for environmental data and how we assess anthropogenic impacts and how we can actually access some of this data. So I'll just be giving a bit of an overview of a project that Lauren and I are working on at the moment, and then looking at some of the opportunities and unique challenges of working with data in the Arctic. So first off, we are working with AIS data for shipping. So for those who don't know, AIS data is automatic identification system, which is a requirement under the International Maritime Organization. They require vessels over 300 gross tonnage and all passenger vessels in international waters to have AIS on their vessels. So the AIS data is on the vessel and sends out signals to either terrestrial or satellite receivers, and that can be either dynamic data on speed and location, and also static information on the type of vessel and the weight and length and things. But in national waters, there's not the same requirement for AIS, and that's certainly the case for smaller passenger vessels, the likes that might be used within whale watching activities. And obviously, from an Arctic context, there's very unique challenges with AIS, with the sparse infrastructure for receiving these signals when vessels are traveling through the Arctic, and also how the weather conditions can actually impact on how these signals are received. So this is the PAIM Arctic Ship Traffic Dataset. It's a data portal available here, and it comes up with a map of the Arctic, and you can enter in for different years and look at vessel intensity within the Arctic. Now, this is the data set we're working with. The challenges of working with this data set are that if you're not an Arctic member or are not an Arctic Council ratified project, you will only be able to get certain redacted data or view static data via this portal. And also, obviously, if you want to view some of the redacted data, you do have to purchase this data. We're luckily in a position where we have a ratified project, so we're able to look at this data in much more detail, which we haven't been able to do in the past. So why are we looking at vessels and marine mammals? I'm not going to dwell on this too much, as I'm not a marine mammal ecologist, but obviously all anthropogenic activities in the marine environment have an impact, regardless of what they're doing. So we have to kind of consider where these activities are happening and how we can use data to inform our decisions around how to mitigate these impacts. So the project that Lauren and I are working on is about mapping whale watching activities in the Arctic waters, and that's in association with PAIM and the Arctic Office, and also Transport Canada. I'm not going to go into the results specifically here. Lauren's going to be doing a presentation on Thursday and going over the results from this particular project. But this is the basis for how we are coming up with some suggestions and opportunities around data sharing. So what are the problems with tourism and whale watching in the Arctic? So we've seen an increase year on year of tourism vessels, so whether that's cruise liners or smaller expedition or whale watching vessels in the Arctic. And obviously, the more ships we have, the more potential for disturbance. And we need to keep developing means for collecting data on these activities to ensure vessel management and monitoring and enforcement. So the majority of the vessels, the small vessels that are involved in these whale watching activities, can have AIS on them. So we don't actually know where they're going, and we don't really know what their true impact is. So we need collaboration between vessel operators and the regulators to ensure that we can sort of work with these to mitigate the impacts. And obviously, from an Arctic perspective, we have to consider it from an Indigenous communities point of view. So they have limited access to real-time AIS data. They can access the PAIM dataset, but as I say, it's historical, it's static. They can't actually look at live vessel tracking. You can, but you have to pay for it, and it costs quite a lot of money to go through more international websites like Marine Traffic. But we also need to be able to integrate traditional knowledge with the scientific data to develop responsible tourism practices. And obviously, one of the key parts of data sharing is data sharing is not a one-way street. We are not looking to just take information and traditional knowledge to inform better practices. We need to be able to give back data that they can use. And we need to be able to have reciprocal data sharing so that they can use that for safe navigation, protect sensitive and important cultural areas, and allow their activities to be respected, and also allowing them to be involved in the marine spatial planning and the sustainable management of their waters. Sorry, a lot of writing here, but there are quite a lot of barriers that we need to consider. First off, given the remoteness of the Arctic, the main one is around technical barriers, so inadequate infrastructure, limited satellite coverage, and compatibility issues. And that's particularly pertinent around the different nations that are involved with the Arctic. And then also around that is the financial barriers. Trying to address these barriers is not going to be cheap. And a lot of this is obviously going to be high cost within the Arctic, given the other technical and logistical barriers that we face. And same in terms of the legal and regulatory barriers around data sharing across different countries. Yeah, so we have an opportunity to collaborate, I think from an industry and academia perspective, but also from a citizen science perspective. I guess it's the understanding where the different data sources should be coming from and how we should be incorporating that. So we have an opportunity to have joint initiatives where we share the likes of shipping data and ecological data, but we need the industry to actually be able to be on board to help provide us with this data that is cost effective. And we also have an opportunity to co-develop tools for better data analysis and visualization of these data. Same for around the regulatory synergy, about enhancing data exchange between regulators and stakeholders, but also being transparent with our data sharing. So that includes making sure that we have good metadata so that we know how the data was collected, and how we can be able to use, how we can use that. Obviously, huge opportunities around international collaboration that obviously come with a number of different issues. And I'll say one from a lessons learned. I do have that in my solutions, but the lessons learned from industry, for example, I was explaining this earlier to a colleague, that the working, for example, in oil and gas within the North Sea basin, even between Norway and the United Kingdom, we have different data sets. We have different, it's not comparable data, yet we're working in the same sea basin. So it's how can we overcome these issues? And I think using the lessons learned from industry and being able to build these data sharing initiatives early on is definitely going to be a big opportunity. And I think that's the point to make here, is that the marine environment's obviously dynamic. It's a multi-use space, whether you're in the Arctic or anywhere else. And I think the challenge always lies between these competing uses across multiple countries, while also trying to address rapid climate change impacts and anthropogenic impacts in general. And we need to foster this open access to scientific and industry data will be crucial in navigating these challenges into the future. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Kate. Does anybody have any questions for Kate before you run off? Yes, we've got a question here.
Hi, I'm Marina. I'm a master's student at the University of Edinburgh. So my question was, as you mentioned, one of the big issues is that industry collects a lot of data and never makes it externally available. So in your opinion, what are ways that we can incentivize different industries to share their data with the public and with researchers? And in the meantime, as researchers, how do we handle that kind of artificial gap in data?
Yeah, no, good point. I think, and I will be speaking largely from a marine energy perspective here rather than shipping, just because that's my experience to date. And I think in terms of data sharing from industry, I mean, it's all about relationships. But I think as well from getting them to provide the data, it might sound controversial, but a lot of industries would rather just be told what they have to do with their data. If it's not commercially sensitive, we should just tell them, regulate that they have to share data. And that's what they actually want to be told what to do, how to collect data, and how we should actually be sharing it. So I don't know if that's the case for all industries. It certainly is for marine energy, that they want to just be told. Yeah. And yeah, in terms of building relationships, it is about networking. The industry will give you the data if they trust what you're going to do with it. So it's kind of your reputation and your collaborator's reputation is very important to how you actually convince them. It's not insurmountable, but it is. It's a lot of discussion. NDAs help as well.
Is there any other questions for Kate before I bring up the next speaker? All good. I would just add about the vessel traffic data. One of the constant frustrations is, depending on the country and the territorial waters where that traffic you're interested in, can really influence how available AIS data is as well. And of course, that is a huge frustration when some countries package and make their AIS very readily available, and others, I'll be diplomatic and say you've got to go through more convoluted channels to get to your data. So yeah, and when you're dealing with something like a vessel that moves around, it's not going to just stay within these borders, and yeah, how we actually kind of unite data sets over large distances is, I think, is a challenge both from the marine mammals perspective, but also the stressor or the pressure perspective. So something we can revisit again in our discussions.
Just picking up on that with the AIS data, I guess the main problem is it's a commercial product. You know, you go to all of the AIS companies to buy data, it will cost you a lot of money. And you can get discounts for working in academia or various other routes to access the data, but it's expensive because it's a commercial product.
Oh, got a question.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question about this IS because it's expensive, but at the same time, like, what is another possibility? Because also the IS, we mentioned that it's based on the satellite and it's not always there, and maybe there's like 6 hours, 8 hours lag or something like that between one data and the other, so you don't really know what the ship has done on that time. So the other option is just trust in the data the companies are going to give you, or like what other possibilities could you expect if we kind of set apart the IS, take into account how much money it costs and how reliable or not, because also they can turn it off, right?
Yeah, the robust. We were just actually having a conversation over. Makes us sound very cool having a conversation over lunch about AIS data. But yeah, one of the big frustrations for me sometimes is that we use AIS data. I see AIS data being used really broadly across a variety of kind of areas of research, without the caveats that are in there in terms of what that data set actually holds. And you very rightly point out that, you know, and especially when we're talking about an Arctic contest, the further north, satellite time and availability and capturing the data, it is a huge factor. What I would say is, like, from 2015 onwards, we've had a lot more satellites up there, and the coverage improves year on year in terms of that lag time between information sharing. You've got to be now very high north before you get quite substantial lag times. I was even on a ship like last year, and it was, we were in quite northern Greenland before you noticed big blips in the EIS track, because we were tracking ourselves being, you know, vessel losers. So yeah, I think our technological capabilities are getting better and better on that, but it's an expensive product, and we won't maybe go into it today, but one of the issues is that, like Kate pointed out, it's only a certain type of vessel that's really captured under that. And we do a lot of research in my lab, and we were looking at kind of like the percentage of vessels are not captured. And in some areas, we're looking at about 80% of the vessel traffic is not actually being broadcast in AIS in coastal waters. That might not be the same for more offshore areas, but again, there's big unknowns about that. So I think we do have a kind of one of our many next questions and steps that we've got to do is actually look further into the EIS in terms of looking at value and how much reliance we can place on that data as being like a complete picture of what vessel traffic is going on. In the interest in time, I'm going to move on, but thank you for that. I feel like I can talk to you about AIS all day. Maria, would you like to come up and our final speaker, and then we'll get into the big questions.
Hello. Oh God, I haven't been up on a stage in a while. So my name is Maria Garaguni. I am one of the deputy secretaries at NAMCO, which is the North Atlantic Marine Mammal Commission, and we're headquartered here in Tromsø. And I'm going to talk to you today about a project within NAMCO to quantify marine mammal exposure to potential bycatch. Because I don't know all of your backgrounds, I thought I would explain just quickly why we care about marine mammals. Firstly, they are what we call common pool resources. They are shared resource, not just for food and materials, but also because they regulate the ecosystems they live in. They play a massive role in cycling nutrients, in the carbon sink, and also they're just cute, right? But the big thing is that they don't care about borders. They go anywhere they want within the confines of their own habitat preferences. Some species migrate many, many kilometers each year. Others show more site fidelity but come in and out of different fjord systems or bays. So yeah, they don't care about borders and EEZ boundaries or any of that. So NAMCO, these are the 4 countries involved in it, so Greenland, Iceland, the Faroe Islands, and Norway. All 4 of these countries have a long, long history of using marine mammals as a food source and as a material source, but they're also linked by a lot of similar cultural traits and just their geography. They are close together, they are close to the North Pole. So they have a lot of in common, and thus NAMCO was formed. So some marine mammal, the role of NAMCO, I should clarify, is to provide scientific advice to these 4 countries on how to conserve or manage, rather, human activities that might impact marine mammal stocks in that area. And some marine mammal stocks are specific to each country, but some are shared between NAMCO countries. For example, these are the management areas for the common minke whale, and if you look at, for instance, the ES block, that is shared between northern Greenland and Svalbard, which is a Norwegian territory. Then other stocks are shared with even more countries outside of the NAMCO area. For instance, the hooded seal, some stocks migrate different seasons between Canada and Greenland and even further. So that kind of creates a problem in terms of managing and conserving specific stocks if they're shared between different countries, and the different countries have different monitoring systems, they have different management systems, they have different management goals. How do you bring all of that together, and how do you come up with solutions that kind of make everybody happy? That's basically what NAMCO does. It tries to keep everybody happy. One of the ways that NAMCO works is within working groups, so bringing together scientific experts on a particular topic. The working group on bycatch is one such group. Bycatch, again, just to briefly explain, is the catching in fishing gear of species that you weren't going out to fish for. So say you're fishing for halibut, and in your long lines you bring up a seal that was curious about the fish on the hooks. This photo is a picture of, I believe, a ringed seal entangled in a fishing net. This particular individual was released by the fishers, but that isn't always their luck. Unfortunately, bycatch today is the leading cause of marine mammal mortality. According to Sea Shepherd, this graphic says that 300,000 whales and dolphins, so not even counting seals, are annually caught in fishing gear as bycatch. So the aims of the bycatch working group are both to quantify bycatch rates in specific fishing gears and specific fisheries, so that way those fisheries could come up with potential solutions and mitigation methods, but also to quantify just the marine mammal exposure to bycatch overall in the NAMCO area. And by doing that, we can recommend to specific fisheries, specific fishing gears, for instance, to not be used in a particular area where there's a lot of overlap with marine mammal species that are at risk of becoming bycaught. So different sizes of fishing vessels, different fishing gears, different marine mammal species, they all interact in very different ways. So we need to find a way to put all of this data together in a sort of a compatible format to give managers some indication of what areas to prioritize for monitoring. So this is kind of the beginning stages of the project still. So we had lengthy conversations about what data we needed and how we would move forward with it, and decided that the basics of what we need are fishing effort data from each of the 4 countries, so that includes both their domestic fleets but also any foreign vessels that come into their waters. And initially we asked for monthly fishing effort per gear type, per area fished. And with that data, we can make maps of the relative fishing effort, the relative intensity of fishing effort in a given area. So we're using Iceland as an example here. And then, of course, we want the marine mammal distribution data. And we decided to start with 10 species to focus on for a start. And then, if we're successful, we can expand the project. Ideally, we want distribution models, and we want the density surfaces of each species. And we want, it's not enough to just have an image of their distribution. We would like analyzable, processable data formats, so shapefiles, rasters, CSVs. And using that data, we can map the relative density of the animals in a given area, in a given month or season. And then we can overlap those two with simple or slightly more complicated formulas to get the relative risk of that species exposure to that particular fishing gear, again, per month or season or year. The data we have so far is fishing effort for all 4 countries, because the countries belonging to NAMCO are, of course, incentivized to share their data to get the management advice. There was no sort of barrier to accessing that. We just had to ask for it politely and explain what we want to do with it. Unfortunately, every country monitors different fisheries in different ways, so we don't have the data for all vessel types or all sizes. So there's very little information on what is the word I'm looking for? Non-commercial fishing. So when you go out fishing for fun, those vessel types, those fishing licenses aren't regularly monitored. But depending on what exactly we want to do, we can kind of massage and coerce the data to fit a specific data format so that we can analyze all of it in the same way, even if it's not all at the same resolution spatially. So these are our 10 focal species, and so far we have access to the modeled density distribution of 5 cetacean species, so the common minke whale, humpback whale, killer whale, pilot whale, and white-beaked dolphin. And these distributions are based on many years of sighting surveys in the North Atlantic, primarily funded by NAMCO countries. And then we also have seal count data around Iceland that can kind of be used as a proxy for where seals are more likely to be in a given season around their haul-out sites. So not density data, but we can, like I said, kind of massage it to be a proxy for the data we want. So here I have some yays and nays of what we've discovered so far. So fishing effort, yay, every country keeps records, and we're able to access them. Every country has entirely different regulations, so everything is in a different format. Marine mammal distribution, yay, there are so many surveys in different years, in different areas, in the Northeast Atlantic. So there is data out there, but the coverage is really patchy, or they happen at different times, or they're not really consistent in their methods. So different survey types, different data formats, difficult to bring together. There's always the question of who owns what data. So if a country has paid for a massive cetacean survey and then a specific university is able to use that data to produce density models, then is it the university or the country who owns the distribution models at the end? And you do have the question of, are people willing to share their work? And it's not just individual people, but also institutes and countries. So if they've poured all of this money and time and effort into collecting the data, then they're not always incentivized to share that without some clear reciprocation. And of course, the big question of can we use these entirely different data types to come up with a consistent and comparable end result. So for instance, those are the density maps for sperm whales in the Northeast Atlantic based on the massive collaborative surveys that occur between NAMCO countries. And that is the ideal version of the data that we're looking for. It's density surfaces. But then for other species, the modeling work hasn't been done yet, so we only have the sighting locations. We can, of course, we do have the effort data as well, but effort and sightings are not necessarily enough to produce a density surface if you're not incorporating a lot of environmental data to figure out which areas the animals actually prefer. So then, assuming we get all of the data that we want and need, and we are able to produce results, what format would be the most useful to the most people? So for managers, I think it's generally enough to have a map, maybe a bar chart or some sort of numbers and images that convey which areas to prioritize. But for the public, is that enough? For other researchers, should we be putting more effort into making our output something that you can play around with, where you can predict different scenarios or look at different seasons in more detail, in more depth? I would be very interested to hear your ideas on this. Then, of course, we do also have to take into account certain constraints, like the fishing effort data in some countries, in some areas, because we have detailed like locations, and sometimes we even have the vessel names. Obviously, we can't share that. That's personal information. So we can't necessarily share with the broader public this very fine scale information. But at a coarser scale, is there something that you as an audience would be interested in seeing? And of course, there's the question of, are there other data sets out there that we don't know about yet? So far, the broad-scale surveys I mentioned are based on primarily the NAS, North Atlantic Sighting Surveys, and then the Norwegian Mosaic surveys, and SCAN surveys, which are mostly in the rest of Europe and further south. So they're very wide-scale surveys. Different countries survey their waters as much at the same time, so that we have a kind of a snapshot image of what the marine mammal abundance is at a given in a given year. But of course, we are in the very North Atlantic, so these surveys can only take place in the summer. So all of our information is pertinent only to summer months. And these are cetacean surveys, so we don't have information on pinnipeds, on seals, and walruses. There is another massive data source. There's the OBIS CMAP. So this is open source data. It's not just for marine mammals, it's seabirds and sea turtles as well. And there are data sets there going back decades. And they all have sightings and effort data, to the best of my knowledge, associated. There's even acoustic surveys, there's citizen science information in there. But again, that's limited to cetacean or pinniped occurrence and not necessarily their habitat preferences, so their density in a given area. So at the moment, I'm not really clear if we will be able to use this as a data source, but it is out there. Yeah, that's me done. If you have any ideas or any further questions, you're welcome to share.
Thank you, Maria. Anybody got some questions for Maria? Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm Toril Blix. I'm a postdoc and researcher at NORS. And I was wondering, maybe you can, in the beginning you said something about how the different countries have responsibilities for different populations or species. Can you say a bit more about what that responsibility entails and if it's different for the different countries? Thank you.
So within NAMCO, the tagline is to have responsible and transparent use and sustainable use. So all management objectives within NAMCO should point to being able to use marine mammals as a marine resource, whether that is with hunting or with whale watching or shipping or whatever else, fishing in this case. Their use has to be sustainable, so maintained so that future generations will have access to the same animals. Responsible, again, making sure that welfare and stuff are taken into account, and transparent. So everything that we as NAMCO debate and discuss and decide and suggest, everything is made public on our website. So all of the decision-making process within NAMCO is transparent. Now within each country, different countries use different species in various ways. So for instance, in Norway, minke whales are hunted. In the Faroes, they're not. In Greenland, belugas are hunted. In Svalbard, I believe they are protected. So there are different management goals. The management goals in Greenland would be to maintain a sufficient stock of, let's say, belugas to feed local communities and maintain that for future generations, whereas in other areas it would be to just protect the stock entirely. In other countries, rather, it would be to not touch the animals as much as possible. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Thank you. I'm just going to invite our speakers back up onto the stage now, and invite you all to take part in a bit of a discussion. As I said, we're going to have a bit of a deeper dive around some kind of key aspects of what we've been talking about. So, just pop this up. So you'll see, as I said, at the back of the room, we've got these 4 questions on the board. So if anybody feels uncomfortable with speaking out, please do feel free to put your thoughts up there. I will say as well, the intention is that after today, we're going to synthesize some of the points that we have been talking about, and we'll do a little news post-it note, and you can get access that on the WAVE website, which we shared a link with earlier, but also on the NAMCO website, we'll pop a link up there as well. So, in terms of what's going to happen with your information we're pulling together today. So the first question we're kind of interested in is, I'm going to actually fire this one to you, Emma, to get things started, and then we'll, in terms of, get you guys to chip in as well in terms of your thoughts. But are there potential data resources that could be shared pan-Arctic internationally? Obviously from my accent and Kate's accent, you know that we're not necessarily, we're wannabe Arctic nation in Scotland. Clinging on at the bottom. But one of the challenges that we face is because we're not an Arctic nation in terms of access, like Kate was saying, there's, for certain data sets, there are limitations about where that data can be used and sat. So yeah, Emma, I don't know if you have any thoughts about this first question.
Yeah, I would say that there are so many potential data resources that could have the potential to be shared. I would argue that most should be shared and used as many different ways as they can be, and that it's just kind of all about finding a way to share them. I think it's most people could agree that they all should be shared, but finding what method is the best way to do that effectively and efficiently. Yeah.
Does anybody else in the room have any thoughts about in terms of data? Like, have you had experiences or challenges, or are you currently facing a challenge with getting access to data for any projects and stuff? Yeah, hi.
This maybe doesn't affect me personally that much.
Yeah.
But it has in the past, and thank you. And it's the fact that a lot of institutions, scientific institutions in the Arctic are government-owned, which means for Norway, for example, that we aren't allowed to contact any Russian institutions, for example. Yeah. And whether we like it or not, Russia is a huge part of the Arctic. So for a lot of recent projects, we're lacking the data from the Russian side. Is that something that you guys also experience in your research?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's like the very short answer to that. Yeah, and that's obviously the geopolitical instability in the Arctic has been discussed in several sessions, but the ramifications and the knock-on effect of data is significant. And I think, to be honest, and I'm talking from a marine mammals perspective here, the data deficiencies from some regions and some countries has been long predating the Ukraine war as well, I think. And then another complexity is language barrier sometimes as well, right? And I think that's an interesting thing in terms of even from when you are searching or using search engines in different countries, they will naturally flag different data repositories. And unless you're aware, and this is where I think the answer ultimately comes back to line and collaboration. And the people that are in countries are best placed and working with those data sets. But if you don't talk to each other, this is like basically the main driver of actually setting this session up is to start this conversation, recognizing that, we, as I said right at the very beginning, we get very comfortable in the stuff that we know. But yeah, I think, I don't know, I saw another hand up there in terms of, I don't know if that was in response to this. But yeah, it's for sure a challenge, and how we navigate that going forward, I don't really have the answer, I don't think. Ronja, do you have the answer?
No, I don't, but I can just say that at WWF we are working with similar challenges, and I wanted to build on Emma's talk where she has talked about the blue corridors, and the Global Arctic Program has recently released an online report about Arctic blue corridors where we have tried to pull together all data sources that were freely available based on scientific and to some extent indigenous knowledge. And we have also employed a consultant to translate Russian literature that was published. We're working on publishing this database further, but until then I would encourage you to check out the online report. And I think we need to work all together in this room to find databases and push for databases where we can safely deposit these kind of data to make sure that they benefit the research community, but also the protection of whales in the long run.
Thank you, Ronja. Yeah, I actually sit on a steering group for ICES, which is to do with basically cetacean data or marine mammal data for the North Atlantic. And it was quite interesting because we had this conversation, given the area that we all work in, and yet you were not familiar with this. I mean, to be fair, it's been going for a couple of years now, but one of the stage that we're at with it is actually thinking about the data products and what would actually be useful. So if anybody has thoughts on this, there's if you look online, you'll find there's the ability to comment and kind of log messages, because we have data inputs from marine mammals, but we don't know how to package them in a way that people would be useful for people to actually be able to use, because as it's been flagged, the data you get in can be quite messy. And that's often not what we actually want to work with, especially at different levels, like from policymakers and managers and stuff. You maybe want a cleaned up data set that you can just have quite a lot of confidence in that this is a distribution layer.
Funny you mentioned language. The fishing effort data that we received from the Faroe Islands was in Faroese. So then we had to go back and kind of ask for translation.
And it all takes time and resources, and that's a big factor in terms of like when you have to try and evaluate how you can actually navigate a project that you want to do, the resources that you're going to need.
I think that's just picking up on what you're saying about the quality of the data. That is the key, because how can you actually trust some of these open data sources in terms of you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out. So it's sort of how can we as scientists actually evaluate the different data sources to make sure that we're obviously using the best data that's available, but being able to understand the limitations of the data, because it may be there and available, but it may actually be either nonsense or not in a fit for purpose. And sometimes that's maybe the problem as well, trying to fit data to your needs when actually it's not suitable.
Yeah, I think that's always a worry, that the messages, the caveats that sometimes come with data, when you've worked with them, you know them very intimately, but that message can get diluted when that data then goes out into the big world, and then you find people using that data without properly understanding what it actually entails. So moving on to the second question, Maria, I think I'll throw this one at you first of all. So what are the data and information needs of different users and the challenges of, I guess, understanding that?
Right, so I mentioned in my talk that for the managers that we work with, we go to them with reports and presentations. So they don't really, so obviously they want the information, but they don't necessarily need the underlying data. But when it comes to other scientists that we work with, if, for instance, we come up with a map of the relative exposure risk for, let's say, beaked whales, is it enough that it's just out there on a map, or is somebody out there going to want to maybe further that research, maybe compare what we've done with other areas in the Atlantic or the Pacific, or even more locally for their countries? Is there a way we can make our data comparable, openly comparable with other work that's being done in the world? Like, that is a big question. And again, what you were saying about the data quality and trying to coerce data sets that weren't collected for our purpose to fit our needs as scientists. Now I'm taking off my manager hat. It is really difficult, and if that metadata gets diluted over time, then it's very easy to massage data and just kind of forget that there's anything wrong with it. So I think the one key takeaway from today is to always associate your metadata with everything that you produce. Just have very clear records of how it was produced, and that can be, if you've conducted an analysis, having your code as open source is one way to do that, so people can go back and look at it. Having very precise records of where, when, how the data were collected, and what versions of software you used to conduct all of your research. All of that has to be included. And in the hope that as it gets passed around and shuffled around, that metadata goes with it. I don't think that really answered the question, though, what the different needs are. I think in terms of the work that we're doing, we also have to acknowledge that we do outreach as well within NAMCO. So in terms of outreach, then, is a map enough, or do we want to be more educational and offer people the opportunity to kind of interact with the data, to see how a change in fishing activity in one season can actually offer some respite for the marine mammals that go to that area to feed or breed. I don't know if there's any more thoughts from the audience on this.
I mean, I think from my perspective, it's going back to just the data needs. So, we talk around about, as researchers, in terms of co-developing projects, and it's, how we have to write our grant funding these days to say how we collaborate with end users, but how we actually really co-create these different types of data projects is probably quite a big question, because what data they need to design a policy is different from perhaps what the data that a researcher might want to collect to answer their particular question. So I guess it's trying to define the need of the data and how we actually develop that with the end users.
Kind of interesting, though, in a bit of a chicken and egg situation, because many of the data sets that you guys have mentioned over your 3 talks here are, albeit quite modern, but historic data, right? So the data's been collected, the horses are at the barn, in terms of like the product that you can make from that data. So I wonder also, in terms of thinking about future marine mammal data collection, in terms of, we have this opportunity where we have actually got to think more strategically about the many different perhaps needs that we have to the data, and the fact that the limitations of the current data, or the challenges that this is actually, like you're talking about metadata, and how many times have you found a data set that you would really just love to know exactly how it's being collected, how much confidence you should have in that data. So yeah, I think it's like, and there's so much more training now. We were, again, just chatting over the lunchtime, in terms of different initiatives about storing your data in repositories, and trying to standardize them and stuff. But is there any other thoughts from the audience about this particular question in terms of, I don't know if any of you have been involved with, for example, like we've done some workshop activities with different interdisciplinary kind of teams that are coming from like policy backgrounds and stuff, and it's always really wildly interesting when you're in the room, where you think you know what people actually want, or you think that they all understand what they want, and they actually don't. They're speaking very different languages, not literally. No? I know you've had lots of challenges around this one, yeah. So going on to the question number 3 then, just in the interest of time, because I don't want to keep anybody back from your evening. I know we've got a big, hopefully going to the science reception, I can catch you guys later as well. But are there possible mechanisms to make information sharing easier for different end users? Kate,
well,
going to throw this one.
I did write some stuff down earlier, but I think we've probably covered quite a few of them. But for me, it was actually coming down to what you kind of come up with these ideas of sort of central data sharing platforms, data standards and integration, or training and workshops, or anything more technical, logically sort of out there, mobile apps and things like that. But I think the problem it comes down to is who's responsible for it, who's going to pay for it, and in terms of the central data repositories, are there now too many? Because I was sort of noting down the OBIS and eModNet that I use very regularly. But now is at a point now there is just too many data sharing platforms. And how will that work from an Arctic perspective with so many nations involved? Is that a question for the Arctic Council, and should they be leading initiatives for data sharing, perhaps? But also considering multiple resources for this data as well, in terms of that it's not just scientific data, it's traditional knowledge. And Anya Maria was talking in the earlier session this morning about Indigenous communities being networks of resources and knowledge. But it's like how we can sort of bring everything together to make the best of everything for the marine environment in the Arctic and the communities. But not just putting in another data portal just because we have some data. It's perhaps we use what's already there, I think.
Yeah, no, and I think also segueing, I think in terms of actually linking what you said about this question to the last question, in terms of the end users, I think in terms of, we didn't really speak about Arctic communities, and I think, I'm acutely aware of this as someone that comes from a non-Arctic nation anyway as well, like in terms of the responsibility I have to, if I'm doing any Arctic research, that it is absolutely my responsibility to learn what I need to be doing to help Arctic nations and Arctic communities. So it's about, for me, like when we're talking about like ways of knowing, Indigenous knowledge, like understanding how I'm to use that responsibly to deliver something that the community then can use and take forward and basically strengthen their voice when it comes to making decisions and making management decisions. And I think that's where, again, we have this challenge, because especially with Indigenous ways of knowing, it doesn't necessarily, like what we've been talking about are like hardware, software, data, like data as we understand data and information. Oral histories are not necessarily caught within a file type, right? They are passed down, and how you actually, again, make sure that these hugely important pieces of information are not kind of overlooked, I think, like we've, again, been kind of really guilty of in the past as well.
Do you think that, though, it comes down to as well, like what, for us, obviously, we're reliant on what gets funded. And in terms of where our research councils fit and fund money is often not conducive to those types of data sources.
Yeah. I don't know, before we go on to, because that's a nice segue into this last question about opportunities, but I would, invite anybody, if there anybody who would like to add in it. I saw there was some, the dream would be that, as I said, I'm not sure we've got anybody from the Arctic Council here, but like in terms of hosting data and, it's a platform which, by its very nature is designed to span multiple aspects of the Arctic but also data in that capacity too. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts or wants to add anything to that. I'm very acutely aware that the day has been a long one already. It's like the first day, there's been a lot of information sharing. So I thought we would end on a positive note around opportunities. I know there's several sessions that are going to be coming up this week, but I just thought, yeah, it'd be good to kind of have a bit of a brainstorm. You've already identified the challenge in terms of funding, but I think in light of the up-and-coming polar year, in terms of projects and thinking, I would encourage you all, for those of you that are thinking about collaborations and projects and thinking how you can get involved, in terms of thinking about the data that you're going to be using, the data you want to use, thinking about the data products is part of these projects in terms of the value of collaborating, maybe beyond the relationships you currently exist. I think there's a lot of opportunities that the polar year in particular brings in terms of working with people that you perhaps haven't worked with before, that might bring something to an Arctic context that we haven't previously considered. So yeah, I don't know if you guys have any specific thoughts. There's also a EU funding call that's going to be, I think, out this summer too.
I'll maybe just pick up on the industry point earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be like, the opportunities are endless in terms of what industry can offer us, but you have to get in early enough. But I would say don't be a case of being scared to go out to industry, and whether that's shipping or energy companies, they are a good resource of data. It does sometimes take a bit of time to get them on board, but it is worth it. And largely they are willing to share. It's not a case of, as I said before, if it's not sort of commercially sensitive, they don't really have a remit to withhold that data from you. But I would say it's definitely worth making the effort to speak to industry. We've kind of done it for a number of years, and it has paid off in dividends. So I would say encourage you to approach industry and don't sort of keep them separated from the data sources that we produce as researchers.
Yeah, I would echo that in terms of, I can't speak for oil and gas, but in terms of shipping and various different vessel sectors, they've been, it's been quite refreshing, I guess, when you work in the world of academia and you get very used to the academic processes, to have people that are not maybe bound by those restrictions or thoughts, in terms of, like, a lot of time, Emma and myself were talking about this, in terms of particularly with marine mammals data, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of work, a lot of investment, and sometimes by the time that marine mammal data gets out there into open source data, it's been very well used, and by the time that it's available in terms of getting more new science out of it, and as researchers will want to publish new science and things, whereas often industry they just want to know, right? They're not really, they don't care how that thing goes out into research. They're delighted to see it being used beyond what they wanted it for.
Also, just to hop on to what you just said about the marine mammal stuff taking a while to get out there, a lot of the time that means, especially in the context of a rapidly changing environment, that means that it's no longer relevant by the time it is made available. And then just a question, general kind of pondering that has come up with all these talks. Do you think it is just down to these individual reaching out on a kind of, you as Kate reaching out to an industry to ask for a data set, or is it something, and building these relationships for your massive bioprotect project, is that just individuals reaching out to one another, or is there some, I guess, more standardized way to do things on a national, international level?
Yeah, I think having a more standardized way would probably be beneficial and good, but I do think a lot of it is building connections, and whether those connections are built from meeting in a conference like this or online over not Twitter, but something else. These connections, they really can bring people together and humanize people and realize, oh yeah, this is cool data, but I could share it and then we could do even cooler things together. Even this data that has been really already milked for everything that it has, you all of a sudden combine it with another data set of a different species and look at the interactions of those two together, and you have something totally new. So I think it would be great to have more facilitation of it, but I do think a lot of it is just connection. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I think as well, how can you use new technology and innovation? How could we use AI to better process or better shared data? Or, you know, how could AI help in tracking whales, and, you know, what tools are already available for that type of activity? What was the one you mentioned earlier, Lauren, the happy whale or something?
Oh, yeah. So, like, I mean, I guess we haven't really even touched upon citizen science to data as well today, you know, and probably don't have time to fully go into that now, but I think that's always a really interesting one for me in terms of it depends on your viewpoint on terms of how open you are to the inclusion of citizen science, as we've kind of called it. But I think it can have value. There's sometimes been a reluctance, I think, from researchers to necessarily integrate, you know, given the uncertainty sometimes associated with, you know, like the confidence in which, you know, there might be error in citizen science data, but they're usually big data sets. And can we identify uses for them, like in terms of validating, for example, surveys that we might, you know, like you were saying, you know, like how do we massage data sets together? You know, can we actually look at these as like comparisons and stuff? So I think they have huge value. And yeah, the Happy Whale project, you know, that uses like AI to detect humpback whales in particular. You know, that's again the problem with that, or the limitations is, you know, it's really already demonstrating how powerful it is for a particular species. But you know, there's the capacity to go, yeah, I think, you know, broader with this. But again, all that takes time and investment, and also, I mean, Happy Whales are also one that's been, you know, a lot of resources being put in by industry as well, right? Because it's used on like cruise ships and expedition ships and stuff like, because it engages the passengers, but also on the flip side of that, they give, you know, some donations back as well as the data that they're inputting from their ships. So I think, yeah, it's recognizing these relationships which give from different sides. And I think, like you were saying, in the industry, I guess a lot of my conversations has always been like just actually outlining how this benefits them. You can say how it benefits you as well, but they're usually really interested in understanding how it benefits them, and then, you know, and then they're sold. So I think that's often we don't sometimes as researchers do that, and I think it would encourage, yeah, anybody, especially if you're early career, like not to necessarily hesitate about reaching out, because until you reach out, worst case, they ignore you or they rebuff you, you know, and you go on to the next person. But if you don't knock on the doors then, and you don't ask the questions, I think sometimes we're really hesitant to ask, and then, yeah, it's incredible how sometimes things come about. But so yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for coming along today. I'm going to finish because it doesn't seem right to have a session without some whales in the background to finish. But yeah, thank you so much for coming along, for your time this afternoon. As I said, I know it's been a big first day. I would encourage you all, again, if there's any other additional points you'd like to pop on the back wall as you're going out, you can take a few minutes, because we'll finish up a wee bit early, so you can do that. And yeah, do come, and we'll be around over the next few days, so do come and chat to us if you've got any interest. Anybody wants to talk EIS? Always here to talk EIS. But yeah, thank you so much, and yeah, and thanks again to the UK Funding Councils for facilitating the session, and our amazing speakers today. If you can join me in saying thank you again to you guys.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm going to come and meet your lab on Friday.
Yes. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. But I was interested in the participatory GIS work you've been doing.
Yes. Yeah.
I'd love to hear more about it at some point anyway, even if it's Friday. But yeah.
I'm definitely not, I'm newer to the lab, so I'm not as experienced in the participatory GIS work, but it's really cool. And we could definitely talk about it, or other people in the lab that have more actual experience, but it's really great. I didn't even talk that much or anything about it.
I saw it on the slide, and I was like,
but the participant, that's one of, I didn't have time to go into it in detail with this project, but it's really cool, like, you know, involving it and finding different ways to work in the different areas to involve it, and also using it to identify areas of like social kind of importance. So rather than just ecological importance, to factor that in these management
lots of
potential.
interesting stuff. Yeah, no. Well, maybe on Friday.
Yeah, definitely, and wonderful that you're here. I've heard, yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yes.
It's been nice. We've had a very intense last week discussing projects.
Yeah.
But it's been really good. So it's just lovely being in Tromsø. I like any excuse to come here. I take it.
Yes.
So yeah, I really enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.
Yeah. But yeah, I'll see you more on Friday.
Yes.
Other people talk to you.
Yes, yes.
Hello. Thanks for a really good presentation.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a documentarist from Finland.
Okay.
And I also live here in Northern Norway.
Oh, wonderful.
And everything you spoke is super interesting and has something to do with our documentary development. So I'll send you an email later so we can maybe chat about it.
Do you have my email? Or should
I found it from university.
Perfect. Yes, okay, looking forward. Yes. Oh, hello.
My name is Matilda.
Hi.
I'm a recent graduate from North University.
Cool.
And I haven't heard of your bioprotect project before, but I researched a little bit during the talk now, and it sounded really interesting. And I so what's your role exactly in the
So UIT, so the universe, so it's it's a very big collaborative project. UIT is responsible for work package 3, and we have duty kind of some certain tasks in work package 4. But primarily we're responsible for, which I was saying to someone else that I didn't talk about, but we're doing this participatory GIS, so using collecting citizen data to get information about their sense of place, and so how people are connecting, how people are using different areas, to use that for this management tool. We are also responsible for kind of collecting all of these anthropogenic layers, and we're working with the Institute of Marine Research to take those layers from just like anthropogenic layers and to turn them into pressures, so kind of seeing how the sound is going to affect the whale. So
yeah, because I saw that like you have one of the working groups or like the main locations around Lofoten in the area,
yeah.
But so you're basically based in Tromsø, and then you collect you don't have people actually based in these areas.
I didn't explain the full the breakdown of the project. So the way that it works is we have this kind of overarching project and theme, but then we have these 5 different kind of case study things where we're going to be like testing things and focusing, and then we use those as the locations to kind of test this bigger planning tool. So Lofoten is one of those. So the Institute of Marine Research are the ones that are in control of all the like specific things that are happening in Lofoten, but we're working very collaboratively with them.
So if one wanted to maybe participate, the Institute of Marine Research would be people to contact maybe, or?
If it's Lofoten specifically that you're interested in, it probably wouldn't hurt to contact the Lofoten point people and the Tromsø people if it's like a Norwegian specific, and then we can kind of see what you're interested in and where it can go.
Because I recently graduated and I'm really interested in ocean protection. Like I wrote my thesis on basically where in Norway on the Norwegian coast the areas of highest like biodiversity or like the most perfect areas for implementing marine protected areas, and Lofoten was a very, very big hub of that basically. And it's really nice to see like projects like this, but sometimes it's difficult to like get into it or like because it's often like you said big collaborations of already existing places, but then so we would suggest
I would contact about and like what you're interested or then I would contact I would like just shoot a shot and send it contact so Meta, now I'm blanking on her last name, but Meta from Myanmar on the BioProtect is the person that's kind of the head there, and then I would contact either like myself or Vera Hausner is kind of
Emma Vogel, right?
Emma Vogel, yes.
Yeah, and you are mainly stationed at the university.
Or Vera Hausner is kind of the University of Tromsø head person in the project. And to get more information and see if you can fit in somewhere. But it's new and it's big.
Yeah. Do you also have a collaboration with the MPA project? Have you heard of it? Which is currently ongoing in Boda, like for nurse
I've heard of it. I'm not sure if we have I'm not aware of a collaboration.
Okay.
That doesn't mean
Because I was wondering, like when I saw like my supervisor.
Du kødder deg ikke lommelapp på det.
We absolutely should. There might be, and it might be above my level of knowledge, but it sounds like it'd be very relevant, definitely. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Enjoy the rest of the conference. Yes,
Yes. And nice meeting you.
Yes, nice to meet you.
We study international environmental law at UIT, and I was actually wondering, because we're in the last phase of our master's degree, and I would be looking to study in 2020, and I was wondering if Mammal offered any legal positions.
Hello.
Very cool project.
And also very cool blue corridor page. I love it. Yes, I've seen it's beautiful.
It's been a lot of effort. You probably have heard from Lauren also.
Was that me?
That we are currently working on bringing this into a publishable format so that then the data can also be accessed.
Yeah.
But
Because we did have law to see and marine mammal protection miles reports.
can we turn it off?
And outside of internships,
I'm afraid to do anything.
Yeah, I understand.
Stay away.
As long as it doesn't explode everything. That's definitely going to make my colleagues aware also. And you just started, is it a 4-year program or how long?
Yeah, so for me or for the project?
For the project.
The project's until 2020. Yeah, it's a 4-year to 2028, I believe. Yeah, so it's quite long and it has really good. It's my first time being involved in one of these big EU projects, but it's really efficient leadership. So I think it's going to be good. Like it's.
There are these kind of things are needed.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. So I will give you my card, but I will also try to reach out to you and maybe talk.
Yeah, please do.
We are consolidating a lot of things right now. But when we are done with that, we have like headspace to think about how to do this. Want to see, and we are advocating for like a data repository at PAIM.
Okay. Yeah.
So the corridor projects at PAIM.
Yeah.
So let's see how much success and movement we see there in the next couple of months.
Yeah.
Because I think then I'm not sure whether it makes sense.
you never know.
Maybe if you like the EU as an observer, if you want to flag that maybe you as a project and also something to contribute to your contact at the EU, maybe they also want us to take it up in PAIM that like you have this going on, but maybe it just aligns with their strategic priorities. I don't know so much.
I'm trying because I also don't know much. So you're saying to suggest to the project, to suggest to the funding agencies that connecting this with...
I'm not sure like where your project is funded from and who the people from the EU are who are in PAIM.
And it's
But if the part of the EU that's funding your project is also the part of the EU filling the observer spot, then it would make all the sense to flag it very explicitly to them that this is something that you would support, that you support it, or this is something where the EU can also show what they're doing and so forth.
That sounds really common sense. I'll have to try to figure out.
Because for example, I'm leading the own project also, and that's funded by the
websites
foreign policy instruments, but also like co-coordinated by DG Mammal. So if it's DG Mammal that funds you, maybe
thank you for
there's a good way in.
Yeah. Cool. There's something in there. I definitely think so. It's so nice meeting you.